Hello and welcome back to Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group's UCMC podcast, where our analysts convene to delve into the realms of Russian disinformation, propaganda, and the influence tools hybrid warfare uses in 2024. Today we'll be discussing Zelensky's visit to the US, a success or a failure. This has been the narrative that I've seen in Ukrainian circles and in the West, success or failure, as Zelensky came back with basically nothing. But my point of view here is that the visit can't be considered a success or failure because Zelensky went there at a time which was quite considerable. It's the end of the presidency of Joe Biden. And he used this opportunity to go and speak at the United Nations, to also go and thank Joe Biden for the support he has provided Ukraine with for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, which is incredibly important in terms of diplomacy. And he had quite an unprecedented opportunity to be able to meet with both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump at the same time, which doesn't really happen where a president goes and speaks to potential candidates. So I wouldn't actually say there was an objective of trying to come back with anything except the green light, the go-ahead to strike Russian territory. Obviously, he didn't come back with that, and that's where a lot of people are saying it was a failure in this sense. But I honestly do believe that those people that did expect that are living in the clouds somewhere, because we know these decisions will not be made just before the US election. So incredibly risky for the Biden administration now to give the go-ahead when Biden wants to finish his presidency on good foreign policy terms. And we know the Biden administration is not going to do and take any risky steps until we know who's going to be the next president. Also, we've got to remember that from this visit, there has been a lot of Russian propaganda pumped into this from obviously the Kremlin side. And I don't think we can separate the visit with the announcement of the amendments to the nuclear doctrine. Kremlin used this to ignite more fear in the Western society, especially in the US, in order to make sure Ukraine and Zelensky comes home without that green light. We saw the similarities between Russian propaganda and, let's call it not the Republicans, but Trump propaganda, using the same kind of idea that giving Ukraine the green light will lead to World War III, exactly what the Kremlin wanted to push, and it did so successfully. There are a few mistakes, which, in my opinion, Zelensky and Bankovy, the office of president, made out in the US. There was a statement before Zelensky arrived, maybe it was even on the plane to the US. He told reporters that we are close to finishing this war, which is, for me, a failure in strategic communications. Why? Because what does it actually mean? What does close to finishing the war actually mean? We have no understanding of how this war is going to end. We all understand that this war is going to at least continue for the next year, if not 2, maybe 3, and onwards. Many analysts in Ukraine are trying to adjust the Ukrainian perception of what to understand that this is a long-time war now, especially seeing as Zelensky was going to the US to ask for, basically as part of this peace or victory plan, more weapons. And when you're saying that we're close to finishing the war, what's that going to create? That's only going to create more narratives from the side that don't want to help that, well, if we're close, why are we giving more money? Why are we giving more weapons? It doesn't really make any sense. But also it creates the narrative for Russian propaganda, which we see time and time again in this war, that if we're coming close to the end of the war, Ukrainian society starts to think, okay, for example, mobilization. If we're coming close to the end of the war, then maybe I should just sit tight, not help, not prepare, and stay away from mobilization, not go to the war offices or not do anything to help Ukraine in the war effort, because they think, you know what, in 3 months, 2-3 months, it could all be the end. And this works for the Kremlin because it weakens Ukrainian society's understanding of the war and how long this can actually last. And also for Zelensky himself, it creates a feeling of dishonesty. If Zelensky keeps on saying statements like this, people will believe him less and less in the future. So my point is here, basically, it can't be seen as good or bad because there has been nothing bad that has come of it. It just hasn't fulfilled many people's expectations in regards to weapon given the green light. So not good or bad, but in my opinion, just a very useful and necessary step before we know who's going to be the next president of the United States.
I fully agree with you that you cannot talk about it in a black or white colors. The main point for me is that it was, despite all the context and despite rush developments and dynamics of electoral campaign in the United States, it was the right time to visit White House and to reach negotiations with both candidates. Because at first, Ukraine is still conducting its operation in Kursk Oblast, so that is a clear trump card in Volodymyr Zelensky's pocket. And also, the days before Volodymyr Zelensky visit, Ukraine launched a series of attacks against Russian strategic warehouses, and the big numbers of munitions which could be employed against Ukrainian army was blew up. So that was a clear examples how Ukraine may sustain in this war, and the vision of Ukrainian authorities that in such circumstances, when Ukraine cannot whip out Russia from its territory because of lack of ammunition, because of lack of manpower, and it is an objective story. Our strategy, Ukrainian strategy, with support of the West, should be concentrated on attempts to undermine Russians' military positions, their military power, with targeting strategic depth of Russian territory, Russian rear, because right now they can operate there with complete security, and that is not a fair story. That is not how wars are waging. And the main story now is, and this is the main difference from the previous periods of the war and previous visits of Ukrainian leaders to the United States, is attempt to make a clear vision of how Ukraine, with the Western support and at first input from United States, may succeed in this war.
I totally agree with you. Ukraine carried out some very successful strikes on these weapon storages before Zelensky's visit to the United States, and that absolutely worked in Ukraine's favor because it showed the US administration how Ukraine could use weapons from the West and come out of it without any civilian casualties.
I'd like to add that after Zelensky's meeting with Joseph Biden, we came to the clarity in this issue that the only chance that this permission will be received will come only after the elections. And frankly, it was obvious from the beginning, because if Biden will provide Ukraine with such a permission to hit Russia with United States missiles, that could make some impact on the results of the elections. And
100%.
hopefully Trump will use this against White House and criticize them for fueling
potential World War III.
Yeah. So
cool. Thank you very much for coming on today, Volodymyr. It was good to chat this out, and we will be in contact and speaking again very soon in the future.
Thanks in advance. So keep in touch.